When the Islamic State gathered strength, the world watched the fighters, missing the wives who shared their authority and seized homes in Raqqa and Fallujah. Within 3 years, these women would sit trapped in crumbling basements under heavy bombardment, waiting for a violent end. Yet they traveled for a promised religious duty, stepping directly into an epicenter of fear and violence. In June 2014, they were traveling to build an empire. The migration traces back to June 29, 2014, when Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi stood at the pulpit. He delivered his sermon from the Al-Nuri Mosque in Mosul, a city holding nearly 2 million residents at the time. His speech specifically urged women to participate in constructing a new society, expanding his call beyond the armed men. Recruiters amplified his message online, offering a carefully curated vision of dignity and purpose. The propaganda bypassed traditional borders, reaching audiences from North Africa to the towns of Central Asia. Inside European apartments, the faint glow of smartphone screens illuminated the faces of young women watching recruitment videos late into the night. They purchased plane tickets and quietly abandoned their families to join the movement. Carrying small bags through the dusty terrain, these women crossed the borders of Iraq and Syria. Crossing the border immediately unlocked access to stolen property. Wives of foreign commanders walked into seized homes in Mosul, Raqqa, and Fallujah as the new masters. They settled into furnished rooms left behind by fleeing families. Their daily comfort relied entirely on direct eviction. These women enjoyed stable electricity and smuggled fresh produce on their dining tables. Outside those very doors, the actual owners starved on the streets. The title of a wife carried 2 opposing meanings within the newly conquered territory. For foreign arrivals, it meant power. For captive Christian and Yazidi women, it meant subjugation, repeated abuse, and forced marriages. The administration officially classified thousands of Yazidi women as military spoils. 4,700 foreign women joined the Islamic State by 2015. Control over stolen households quickly mutated into a craving for public dominance. Foreign wives transformed from passive enablers into active, ruthless wardens. In Raqqa, they became the street terror. The Al-Khansaa brigade systematically hunted the local female population across the city. These female patrols rigorously inspected pedestrians for mandatory full black garments. Any minor deviation provoked immediate roadside punishment. The sharp crack of a leather whip punished a wrong hemline on the spot. These foreign recruits became the physical apparatus of everyday repression. They struck genuine fear into local civilians, just like the armed militants. This massive demographic influx represented a staggering reality on the ground. 4,700 female volunteers equaled the combat manpower of an entire NATO infantry brigade. This dedicated force flowed continuously from Tunisia, France, Germany, Russia, and the United Kingdom. Indoctrinated teenagers and hardened widows patrolled the conquered streets side by side. They seized unquestioned authority over the subjugated communities. The illusion of protection was absolute. Fighter jets obliterated the concrete bridges over the Tigris River, severing supply lines and transforming the besieged city into a sprawling, inescapable trap. This manufactured safety collapsed entirely by the autumn of 2016, as the vast borders of the caliphate finally began to contract. The decisive offensive for the capital of Nineveh province commenced in October, drawing a combined force of over 100,000 Iraqi army soldiers, Kurdish fighters, and coalition troops. The tightening grip of the 9-month siege rapidly exhausted the remaining supplies of basic food and crucial medicine. Airstrikes dismantled the fortified checkpoints across the urban grid. Inside the decaying stronghold, the rigid hierarchy of power fractured from within. Wives of commanders like Abu Abdurrahman al-Balawi and Abu Muslim al-Turkmani tried to discard their black garments and blend into the civilian crowds. They hurried past the ruins, the sharp crunch of concrete crumbs echoing beneath their moving feet. The hunters became prey. These citizens had lost family members to street executions, and their lingering fear mutated into violent revenge. When the fleeing wives were recognized in the narrow streets, angry residents surrounded them without hesitation. Locals battered the disguised women to death on the shattered pavement. Those who evaded the mobs retreated into the narrow alleys of Mosul's old city. Mothers huddled in dark cellars, shielding infants from the artillery fire, but their hands gripped explosive detonators. The damp smell of the basements mixed with the scent of raw explosives. The medieval labyrinth dates back to the 11th century. Armored vehicles could not enter these corridors. Iraqi troops cleared every structure on foot. Inside, suicide belts remained hidden under dark fabrics, pressed against the children the women held. When soldiers breached the doors, the waiting wives triggered the charges. Blasts ripped through the confined spaces. They killed troops, neighbors, and their own families. There was no honor or protection in those final subterranean moments. While Mosul's old city collapsed underground, Raqqa remained the final command center. In 2014, this Syrian city was the beating heart of the propaganda machine. By 2017, the self-declared capital had become an overcrowded cage. Raqqa sits deep in the Euphrates River Valley. Once forces blocked the bridges and desert routes, the local geography created a natural trap. Thousands of militant families converged on a single surrounded city. They believed the capital was their safest stronghold. The reality proved different. Syrian Democratic Forces cut off the last supply lines. United States airstrikes pounded the urban grid from above. The safest place in the caliphate became the densest target zone on the map. The smuggled food ran out. Remaining wives abandoned their stolen comfort. They hid inside crumbling mansions from the daily bombardments. The mansions collapsed above, driving the widow of Supreme Cleric Turki al-Banali into complete darkness. She crouched inside a subterranean passage, listening to the heavy footsteps echoing overhead. The underground tunnels, originally dug by the Islamic State, had become their own final trap. A May 2017 airstrike killed her husband. She tried to flee. Total blackness filled the concrete shaft before Kurdish fighters suddenly breached the entrance. They pulled the woman up into the blinding daylight, exposing her to the waiting locals. Before the war, Raqqa held over 220,000 people. The remaining survivors now unleashed years of accumulated terror. They knew exactly which houses belonged to the elite. Vengeance replaced the law. The sharp smell of ash and burning flesh drifted across the city squares. Locals dragged the wives of officials out of their hiding spots. Residents burned some alive right in the open. Civilians beat the captured commanders' wives directly on the ruined streets. Women who escaped the street mobs fled toward the Euphrates River. Their retreat ended behind barbed wire. Tens of thousands of people were driven into small patches of eastern desert. By 2018, Deir ez-Zor province collapsed. Surviving families were herded into the Al-Hol and Raj detention camps. Originally designed for 10,000 refugees, Al-Hol swelled to hold over 70,000 women and children. Every day came down to physiological survival. The wives of commanders had expected palaces and the spoils of a global caliphate. Instead, their reality consisted of stale bread, rice, and lentils inside canvas tents. Winter turned the camp into a frozen swamp. Sticky, freezing mud covered the floors beneath their sleeping mats. Clean water disappeared, and latrines overflowed directly into the pathways. Malnutrition weakened the captive population. Infants died from basic, untreated infections, while sick infants died inside the guarded tents of Al-Hol. Frontline Syrian soldiers delivered their own verdicts without holding cells. The descent was stark. In 2015, the Bethnal Green girls wore crisp school uniforms in London. By 2018, they wore Syrian rags. Over 40,000 foreign volunteers had traveled to Syria during the war. Now their home governments officially refused to repatriate them. Women from Europe and Asia found themselves completely trapped. Not every foreign wife survived long enough to reach a camp. In the ruined villages, militiamen hunted them down. An advancing soldier stopped a fleeing woman. He checked her identity. he recognized the name of an Islamic State commander. A sharp, single rifle shot echoed through the concrete rubble. The executioner simply dropped the body in the dirt. There was no official justice for the foreign elite. Syrian soldiers and rival militias showed zero mercy to the women they viewed as the face of terror. Executions happened openly. Militiamen fired rifles right in front of screaming children. Soldiers dragged the surviving orphans away. The dead remained in nameless mass graves. Those nameless graves only preceded the final trap awaiting the survivors in a dusty village called Baghouz. How did a massive empire compress into exactly 5 square kilometers? The coalition achieved this through a continuous tightening of the bombardment ring that forced thousands against the Euphrates River. 5 square kilometers equals the footprint of a small university campus. By March 2019, this patch held the surviving population of the Islamic State. The siege squeezed families into a maze of shelters constructed from torn blankets and metal scraps. Constant smoke from airstrikes offered no clear avenue for escape. Every detonation compressed the living space further, pushing crowds tighter together. Women found themselves trapped with starving children while the front line edged closer. Terrified by the incoming shrapnel, mothers dug shallow holes directly into the mud with their bare hands. Bombs dropped without warning. Dirt swallowed families instantly. Explosions buried them exactly where they sat in the dust. Inside these freshly dug holes, the wives of high-ranking commanders awaited the final assault of the Syrian Democratic Forces. A continuous heavy hum of American drones echoed over the ruined tents. Unmanned aircraft monitored every movement from above. On the ground, Kurdish fighters tightened the ring. The Syrian Democratic Forces lost over 11,000 fighters during 5 years of war before reaching this last perimeter. As the March offensive intensified, survival was no longer the objective. Women cornered alongside figures like ISIS spokesman Abu Hassan al-Muhajir prepared for the end. They strapped bulky suicide vests tightly under their dark, layered clothing. Some clutched rifles to shoot at advancing troops. Others grabbed their children and sprinted across the open desert. Heavy machine guns cut them down. For the most radical factions, surrender meant unbearable defeat. A group of wives gathered inside a reinforced shelter. They poured liquid fuel across the canvas walls and the dirt floor. When Kurdish troops approached their sector, the women ignited the tent from the inside. Fire consumed the fabric in seconds. The ground campaign ended. The final enclave of Baghouz officially fell on March 23, 2019. The physical caliphate no longer existed, but inside the prison fences, its laws operated with even greater severity. Following the collapse, more than 60,000 women and children were transported behind barbed wire. The ideology did not die in the sand, but simply traveled alongside them in the convoy trucks. The population of Al-Hol camp swelled to 70,000 people, turning the enclosure into a city governed by radicalized inmates. These loyalists established a shadow government, dictating strict behavioral codes across the canvas landscape. The administration organized secret tribunals deep into the freezing desert nights. Inside a dimly lit tent, loyalist women gathered to pass judgment on a prisoner who had spoken against their rules. The accused sat silently on the dirt floor while the judges delivered their verdict without raising their voices. The execution followed immediately under the cover of darkness. They held the condemned woman down and quietly strangled her to death, ensuring the guards heard nothing. Children became the new weapons in this environment, absorbing the lingering extremism from their caregivers. Under the thin canvas shelters, mothers whispered stories about martyrdom and future revenge to their sons in the dark. Humanitarian workers warned the world that these children would inevitably become the fuel for the next regional war. The physical territory was gone, but the movement transformed these detention centers into ideological training camps. In 2019 alone, this internal terror campaign resulted in more than 80 murders. Furious hands grabbed the terrified widow of an infamous emir. The mob dragged her violently through the dusty streets of Tikrit. Before the militant invasion, this prosperous city housed about 160,000 people. Now, They only wanted revenge. With their terrorist shield completely shattered, the exposed women faced the raw wrath of grieving locals. When the occupied territories finally fell, fierce retribution rapidly consumed Fallujah and Mosul in 2017. Vengeful citizens hunted down their former oppressors. Armed men dragged terrified widows straight out of crowded refugee camps. These women fled there, hoping to find a protected sanctuary. Instead, they walked directly into crowds demanding immediate payback for mass executions. There was no waiting for official tribunals. Spontaneous street justice replaced formal law entirely. The angry mob tightly encircled the screaming widow as heavy stones struck her body with sickening, hollow thuds. Piercing cries echoed over the dust, while the desperate crowd delivered its own lethal verdict. The furious civilians executed the deadly sentence themselves. The vigilantism of Tikrit forged a template for firing squads across Fallujah and Mosul. Women in black hijabs stood against brick execution walls, facing local militias. Field judges operated in the rubble. The trial lasted just 2 minutes. A suspected connection to the Islamic State triggered an immediate guilty verdict. Armed men asked brief questions, then dragged the accused to the firing line without offering a chance for legal defense. There was no attorney, there were no appeals. Rifles fired before the women could speak. Locals uploaded videos of these makeshift trials online. The sheer volume of street tribunals overwhelmed official paperwork. Human rights organizations could not calculate the exact number of the killed. 10 minutes for one human life. To stop the uncontrollable street chaos, the government moved the executions into the Central Criminal Court of Iraq in Baghdad. The raging violence of the lynch mobs disappeared, replaced by the cold efficiency of formal judges. Between 2018 and 2020, hundreds of foreign women stood before these tribunals. They had traveled from Russia, Germany, France, and the United States to join the caliphate. The proceedings were just as swift and uncompromising as the street violence. Under Article 4 of the Iraqi anti-terrorism law, any proven affiliation with the group carried a mandatory death sentence. The accused stood in the dock, listening to the echo of the 10-minute session bouncing off the walls of the empty Baghdad courtroom. A prosecutor read the charges, the defense remained silent, and the gavel immediately fell. The entire legal procedure came down to exactly one single question. That single question led straight to the gallows. A European passport offered zero protection from an Iraqi executioner. In 2018, a 20-year-old Russian woman received the death penalty for following her husband to Mosul. A German citizen met the same fate in 2017. Women from France and Turkey packed into Baghdad's Raqqa prison. The facility remained critically overpopulated. Origin meant nothing here. Local guards treated every foreign inmate solely as an accomplice to mass murder. Dozens of women died from severe beatings and cell conditions long before their official execution date. While cells in Baghdad consumed their inmates, a different kind of slow death awaited those locked in the desert. Women who once walked the streets of Paris, London, and Berlin now sat as stateless entities behind layers of rusted barbed wire. By 2019, 7,000 foreign wives and children were trapped in Syrian camps. Their home governments refused to take them back, citing national security risks under new terrorism laws. Officials in these capitals declared the women too dangerous, leaving them stranded in the dry dust of the Syrian plains. They had no legal identity, no husbands left alive, and no recognized path forward. Desperation created a lucrative underground economy within the sprawling tent cities. Smugglers demanded thousands of dollars to sneak these families across the newly built concrete border wall into Turkey. Some paid the price and slipped into the darkness, hoping to cross the terrain unnoticed. But the perimeter was tightly watched, and the sharp crack of rifle fire often shattered the quiet night. Camp guards simply opened fire on the running figures. While low-level wives bled out on camp perimeters, the families of top commanders faced physical erasure. Enemies targeted their bloodlines for extinction. A sudden detonation ripped through the top floor of a safe house in Atma. Concrete slabs collapsed. A thick cloud of gray dust choked the night air. This was February 3, 2022. Delta Force operators surrounded the residential compound. Apache attack helicopters circled in the dark sky, cutting off all escape routes. Inside the building, Abu Ibrahim al-Hashimi al-Qurashi triggered his explosive vest. The blast killed him, his children, and his wives. The ceiling gave way. Heavy structural beams crushed their bodies under tons of debris. The same violent purge erased his predecessor. On October 26, 2019, Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi detonated his own vest during a raid in Idlib. The explosion killed him and 2 children. His surviving wives faced a different end. Rival militant groups hunted them down. Executioners shot the women quietly. To ensure no trace of Baghdadi's lineage survived, they dumped the bodies in secret graves. No courts awaited the high command's families. No foreign governments tried to save them. The highest-ranking wives remained buried beneath shattered concrete and nameless dirt.